Welcome everybody. I'm just going to switch off our holding slide here so you can see me. Hi. Wow, look at all of you. Great to see you. Welcome to our second workshop for effective learning action research. I'm excited to be welcoming some guests today who are going to be sharing their expertise. But before we get into our workshop outline, I'm going to share an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Bunurong people, who are the traditional custodians of the land in which I join you from today. I recognize their continuing connection and stewardship of lands, waters, communities, and learning. I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and those who are still emerging. I also acknowledge and extend my acknowledgement to the lands that you are joining from today, and also the challenging global context that we do find ourselves in. There's a lot going on for everyone right now in lots of different countries. Today, we have the opportunity to connect, to share stories and ideas, develop our understanding, and work creatively so that we can rise to new challenges together. So thank you for being with us again for workshop 2. I'm handing over to Mehdi, who's going to do a prayer for us, and then I'm going to be setting the scene in terms of our workshop today. So Mehdi, if you're with us, if you could share our group prayer, that would be lovely.
Thank you. Tom will begin with a word of prayer this afternoon. Gracious Lord, we come before you again this afternoon. We thank you for your goodness and your continuous blessing and protection as we stay apart. We thank you that you are able to gather us again this afternoon together. We commit this afternoon session into your hands, and we pray and ask that the Holy Spirit will guide us through in our learning and our sharing this afternoon. We commit this time into your hands. And this is a humble prayer we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Mehdi, thank you for sharing that, and welcome to everybody again from, I can see lots of, last time we didn't have our screen in this little mode, so it's lovely to see all of your faces. I know that you're joining on various platforms. We've got our WhatsApp group running as well. Thank you to all the Australian teachers I can see as well in our team. I'm going to quickly share with you the outline for our session today, and just to set it in the context. And I can also see lots of people in the Google chat sharing their introductions and saying where you're from. So if you haven't done that yet already, maybe that's something that you can have a look at whilst we're just sharing some of these introductions. So I'm just going to post up on here. Let's have a look at a couple of slides. So you would have got this workbook already. Hopefully you spotted some of the little treats that I popped in here for you. Look at those QR codes. So I know those will link back to some of the videos that we shared. Let's have a look at what we're doing today. So remember, our workshop today is part of 5 different workshops that we're going to go through across the next 5 to 6 weeks. So this today is all about content. So what's the topics, what's the provocation for our action research? Last week, we looked at process, so we looked at the cycle. Next week, workshop number 3, will be about designing and making a plan. Let me focus your attention on our 3 keys. So 3 things that we're going to be focusing on during our session. Our guests will be speaking about gender inclusive principles for a STEM learning environment, but also for any learning environment. That's going to be our main sort of topic that we're all going to be working on together and exploring. You're going to think about those micro strategies again. You're going to be thinking about what are the classroom strategies or practical ideas that you can go and test and try as part of this action research project. And also, you're going to be spending some time doing some reflection again. Remember what I said to you last time? Reflection is a key practice for us as educators to improve and to continue to get better. So these are our 3 keys for today. And you'll see across the next week or so some further resources that I'll share with you once we have wrapped up today's once we've wrapped up today's workshop. A couple of quick little reminders about how we're kind of working before I also hand over. Captioning. So there's an opportunity to use captions in Google Meet, which means that all the kind of what people are saying will come up on the screen. If you haven't had a go yet, maybe have a look and see if you can add that. It's down at the bottom of the screen. You'll see, let me see if I can just hide that. There's a CC button. It says C and C, and you should turn your captions on. I think you can also press the letter C on your keyboard and captions come on as well, which is pretty cool. So have a look at captions. Make sure that your microphone's on mute unless you're contributing. And I'm waving the flag. Where are our keyboard captains? I hope you're in the room somewhere. We're going to need you today. We're going to need those fast fingers today. So where are our keyboard? If it's not you, you need to make sure you know who's the keyboard captain around you. So they're going to be typing in and using Google Chat to share back some ideas. And that's going to happen really soon. There's a discussion activity coming pretty quick. And we'll be sharing ideas in the Google Chat or in the WhatsApp group as well. My last thing I'd like to share with you is just a reminder about our action research process. And after I've done this, then that's me done. We've got this 4 steps in this process. We are on step number 1, working our way towards step number 2. At the moment, we're still reflecting about, what are we going to focus on? What's the thing that I'm really interested in? Next week's workshop is all about designing and making a plan. And so just know that we're in that early phase of step 1 and step 2. And after that, after step 2, we've made a plan. We'll go off and do something in our classroom. We'll take that idea. Maybe it's come from today. Maybe we might discover something today that we want to try. Well, that's when we start to act in our classroom. Action research. You act. You do something with it. And then we'll make a little test that we can observe the results of, and we'll see the impact. So this is our action research cycle. Just to remind you that that's where we currently are. We're kind of across 1 and 2 at the minute, and our workshop's just in that space. All right, that's enough from me. I would like to introduce our guests. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so you can see my face. I would like to introduce Leanne Robertson and Michelle Hamill, who are both from Education Services Australia. We often say they're from ESA. There is a ministerial not-for-profit company committed to making a positive difference in the lives and learning of lots and lots of different students. ESA work with all education systems and sectors to improve student outcomes, enhance teacher impact, and strengthen school communities. We're really lucky to have Leanne and Michelle's expertise with us today. They're going to charge us and challenge us and provoke our thinking around STEM and gender inclusive learning spaces. Leanne Robertson is the Program Director of Digital Teaching and Learning, and Michelle Hamill is the Content Manager with ESA. And I'm going to hand across to you, Leanne, now. So welcome to our team, welcome to our workshop.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be here. As I mentioned in the chat, I was lucky enough to be at one of these sessions last year, and I was really inspired by some of the STEM projects that I saw. So it was a great opportunity, and I was really excited to be invited back. So tēnā koutou, my name's Leanne Robertson. As Tom said earlier, I'm originally from New Zealand. I was a primary school teacher there. And for the last 25 years, I've been working on ICT or education projects here in Melbourne. Wominjeka, this is the language of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm on here today in Melbourne. I'd also like to pay my respects to First Nations Australians as our first educators, and also to acknowledge their contributing work in this area. I'm going to pass to Michelle, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle, and as I work with Leanne at Education Services Australia, but like her, I've been in education for a long time, and I was originally a teacher as well, and then I worked for a while teaching teachers, again, using technology in their classrooms in a way that makes meaningful sense for their students and their learning. And then I've worked in education projects in all sorts of different aspects of online learning and classroom resources. So I'm really excited to be here today as well.
Thanks so much, Michelle. So before we sort of get started, you're going to hear a lot about STEM today. STEM is one of those things that doesn't really have one definition. All people have, or lots of people have, different definitions about STEM. Some people are not very familiar with the term yet because it is an emerging term. So what I thought we'd do before we get started is hear about your thoughts on what STEM is. Do you know any women who work in STEM? And if they do, what jobs do they work in? And also, what do you think are the jobs that men work in with regards to STEM? And what are the ones that women work in at the moment? So as Tom mentioned, we need the keyboard champions. I'm going to give you 2 minutes just to either talk to the person next to you. If you don't have anyone next to you, you can just add your thoughts into the chat. And where there are more than one of you, the keyboard champion, please add your ideas into the chat. So I'm going to start the timer for 2 minutes. And as we're going through, we'll talk about some of the ideas that appear in the chat. Thank you. Oh, that's great. So I can see that someone's sister-in-law is working in IT, very big area of STEM, and it's going to continue to develop into the future. It's a great area to be involved in. STEM encompasses careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Shelley was a woman working in STEM, worked as a medical scientist for 17 years. We know the situation we're in at the moment. Medical scientists have provided so much support and vision on the current pandemic that, you know, where will we be without them? Anybody else know anyone else working in a STEM job? So I'm currently working on a mathematics hub for teachers, and we know that mathematics is an area where we need more people studying. There's very, very few people in general, but young women moving into mathematics is only about 9% in Australia. Brett's saying that we have an alumni who work for Microsoft and have been instrumental in establishing a Girls in IT award at school. A lot of the industries are getting behind encouraging young women into STEM, and it's a really great piece of work they're doing. So Anna, coincidentally, we have Yalinu's information in this presentation, and I apologise, that was my alarm going off. So thank you everybody who contributed. That's great. So we all know of some women working in STEM, which is fantastic. So as someone mentioned, STEM can be a couple of different things. So STEM can be the learning areas of science, mathematics, engineering, or technology, but it can also be taking 2 or more of those learning areas and creating tasks that develop things like critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. Because what we know is those are the skills that our employers want in the future, and those are the skills that help to solve problems. So what's the problem? You know, we hear about getting more women in STEM, getting more girls involved in STEM activity. Why do we want this to happen? So what we know is that building a diverse STEM workforce, so that's one that's made up not only of men and women, but it is made up with people from all different backgrounds. It's critical for economic growth. So in Australia, they recognise that to move forward, and the same would be in PNG, to move forward, we need people who are qualified in STEM expertise, because those jobs are only going to grow. So one of the problems is that in Australia, women only make up 16% of the skilled STEM workforce. and 36% of university STEM enrolments. So we had a look at some of the data for Papua New Guinea, and we found that when looking at trade qualifications, and we also found that the same, fairly much similar numbers applied for Australia, in technical colleges, only just 3.5% are women, 10% are men. So you can see through those statistics that are on the screen at the moment, there is an imbalance. Teaching, a much better balance. And health, there's actually more women involved in health. So in Australia, we find the same in health, in the health sciences and health-related careers. There are a lot more women, but once you get higher in the career, so people who are professors, people who become chief executive of medical companies, they tend to be men. So the number of women drop off as you get sort of higher up the pay scale. So we weren't really able to find data for PNG, but we know through data that's available globally that a similar problem is sort of reflected around the world. So here in Australia, only 32% of females are choosing at least one STEM elective subject compared to 70% of males. So that's a lot in there, that's a lot. So then this flows through into secondary qualifications, but not only people who are going on to university, because a whole lot of STEM jobs don't require university, and a whole lot of people actually self-train themselves in these areas, particularly in ICT. So I just wondered in the chat there, if you could add, if you teach a STEM subject, so if you teach science, technology, design, or mathematics, what do you think the ratio is in your class? We don't need, we don't need definite numbers, but what's your sense? Have you got half and half, boys and girls? Have you got mostly boys and some girls? I know when I took physics back in the sixth form, the whole class was boys, and I was the only girl in the actual class. Anyone going to pop into the chat what it looks like in their classroom and what they're teaching? So Shelley's saying in her year 7 STEM elective, it's roughly half and half. That's great, Shelley. And you're very lucky to have a STEM elective. I think the experience we have is that many schools haven't yet integrated STEM, and so they're teaching all the subjects separately. So mostly boys in grade 11 and 12, an all-girls school, so we would expect that all your girls are in those subjects. There is very interesting, and I'm sure the teachers in girls' schools know, there is very interesting research about girls sometimes doing better in situations where they are grouped with all girls. So a maths extension year 11 class, that's pretty good. 10 girls and 14 boys, that's quite good. All right, so we are noticing things are starting to change very, very slowly, but there's a lot we can do to help it move forward more quickly. So why is this case? So there's many reasons, and Tom's put some links into your workbook, so you can follow up in some of those resources that are available if you're interested in reading further. But some of the reasons are that students can develop negative attitudes towards STEM before secondary school, and then those negative perceptions carry on with them in secondary school. So often by the time the children have got to secondary school, they've already decided that STEM subjects aren't for them. Sometimes they find that the gender imbalance is from controllable factors like ability, effort, mindsets. We'll talk about parents a little bit coming up because they have a big impact. And also girls have been found to put more emphasis on aligning their careers with personal interest, skills and ability. And they're really, really keen on making the world a better place. So teachers play a critical role. We know that parents play about a 50% role in important or they have 50% influence over their children's interest in STEM. We know that teachers and their peers also make up 50%. So in a school environment, between the teachers and the peers, there's sort of a 50% opportunity to influence a child's interest in STEM. But what we also know is that sometimes it just takes one teacher. So we often hear stories about people who have gone through a particular career interest because they connected with one teacher. So why do we need more girls in STEM? So at the moment, there's only 13% women in Australia in STEM jobs. We know that 50% of the workforce is women. So we know that there's a whole untapped resource in the number of women that could take up those jobs. And currently, there's a shortage of people to move into those STEM careers. Another really important thing is that when working on products, having a woman's perspective actually helps make the product better for people. So there's been stories about gender bias in artificial intelligence products, for example. So the machine learning hadn't had enough experience with women to create products that were suited to everybody. And one of the last things is that by getting girls involved in STEM, it can narrow the pay gap because STEM jobs pay quite well. So why would girls want to do STEM careers? And I've seen some of these conversations on comments to news articles and things like that. People come along and they say, well, why do girls want to get involved in STEM? You know, a lot of them don't like it. It's not suited to them. Well, we know that's possibly not the case. And I was doing some Google research and came across some amazing women from both Papua New Guinea and from Australia. Please forgive me if my pronunciation isn't correct. But some of the things we know is that, as I mentioned before, girls like to make the world a better place. So, for example, Crystal Kiware, in 2018, she won an award with her father where they designed an app during a hackathon to help Bilim artisans and entrepreneurs in PNG help to sell their products, their baskets and other materials as well. So she's gone on, she was self-taught, and she now has her own company, and the article I said that she was looking at studying in New Zealand this year. So the name we saw mentioned a few times in the chat, Yalinu Poya, an amazing woman. She's got to see so much of the world. She was an undergraduate in Papua New Guinea. She did a master's in China, and she's currently finishing her PhD in Scotland. She's also making the world a better place because she's creating a cleaner and safer way to produce ammonia, which is used in fertilizers to produce crops that we rely on to meet global demand. So a lot of women also like to be role models for others, and that's the case with Taylor Griffin. The future job market will be led by STEM. Currently in Australia, less than 1% of Indigenous students are studying STEM at university. And Taylor was the first Indigenous person with graduate honours in an electrical and aerospace engineering degree, which is pretty impressive. And she was the first Indigenous female to graduate with an engineering degree at Queensland University of Technology. So that's one of the things she loves about her job. She loves being able to inspire other young Indigenous women. So STEM jobs pay well, as I said earlier. So Talitha Saraba, she's an electrical engineer in Papua New Guinea, and she's encouraging girls in her province and in the country to take up STEM and to aim high. She says that education is one of the keys to a better life. So one of the other reasons is STEM's creative. Often we think of creative things as being arts and drama and music. STEM is very, very creative because you have to have a creative mind to solve problems. So Dr. Sue Kay is from CSIRO here in Australia, major science organisation, and she's heavily involved in robotics. She says that creativity is extremely important in her work designing robots because you need to be able to imagine things that never existed before. And Neve Fitzgerald is a game developer. She has a very, very high level job at a company called the Dinosaur Polo Club in New Zealand. And she talks about the need for diversity in games development teams because it's how you make a better game. So the Girls in STEM Toolkit is the site that Michelle and I work on. And right at the start of the project, we did a literature review looking at what made learning better for girls in STEM. But as Tom said, what we've actually found is it's not only STEM, it's generally in learning. But what we've also found is that it's not only having a positive impact for girls, it actually has a positive impact for all learners. So we developed these 7 principles, and this is what we're going to talk about. These principles are in your workbook from last week and in your workbook from this week. And now I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who's going to take you through some activities looking at ideas for gender inclusive classrooms.
Hi everyone. So what we're going to do as an activity is have a look at some actual classroom strategies we can look at around these principles. So thanks, Leanne. Great, that's perfect. So the first thing we're going to, I sort of would like to do is frame what the activities are going to be and then start looking at some of these principles in more depth. So as you look at the principles, you can start thinking about the activities we're going to be doing as we go through. So what we're going to do is break out into your classroom teams, or if you're by yourself, you'll be doing it by yourself, but working with whoever you've got in the room or whoever you've got that you can chat to, and that might mean reflecting and then thinking through these things yourself, depending on who you're with. And because there are 7 principles and we didn't want to have 7 little reflection sessions, we decided that having 2 big chunks of thinking time would work well. So we've broken the principles into 2 groups. So we thought that principles 2, 3, 5, and 6 were a lot about classroom strategy and classroom environment stuff, and 1, 4, and 7 kind of worked well together as a group. So we're doing those in 2 groups. And as Tom said, what we're going to be doing is we're going to have some time, and I'll let you know how much time we'll have when we get to the end, some time to have a think by yourself and then share within your team, and then your team will reflect, will share with your keyboard captain or by yourself back into the big group using the chat. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to overwhelm you with information. No, I'm going to talk through principles 1, 4, and 7. Then we're going to have our little activity, and then we're going to look at 2, 3, 5, and 6 and have another activity. So that's what we're going to do. So the first principle we're going to look at is principle number 1, which makes sense, except all of the rest of them are out of order. So this is the first one, and it's the only one in order. Anyway, so the first one is creating a gender-neutral learning environment. So the first thing that Leanne touched on earlier is that children form their stereotypes about jobs and what STEM, like what science means, what technology means, what engineering means, what maths means, really early, like really early primary school. They are often given, boys might be given toys that are boys' toys and girls might be given toys that are girls' toys. And so really early, if boys are playing with Lego and trucks and chemistry sets and girls are playing with dolls and cooking equipment, they're very early being given a message about what it means for boys and girls, what their careers are going to look like. So as teachers, we've got a really important role to broaden that outlook for our students. So that's the first dot point. Second dot point, that part of that is that they also form stereotypes about what they're good at in STEM. So for example, and a big thing in that range is spatial thinking. So it's girls get very anxious very early about tasks where they're asked to move blocks around and rearrange them and see them from different points of view. And for technology, using computers and coding and things like that, they formed stereotypes about those things really early. And so part of that is the environment they're learning in can influence that sense of whether or not they belong in STEM. So we can change our classroom environments to influence that sense of belonging? And what messages do our classroom environments send to children about who belongs in STEM? And there are lots of things that we can do that can help with that. So that's the next slide. So I'm going to give some broad examples of some classroom strategies that we can use as teachers to help overcome those early stereotypes. So one of the first things we can do is we can select some gender neutral STEM products, or have a variety of things that we have in our classroom, like posters or videos or pictures or drawing activities, where we either don't say it's a man or a woman, or we make sure that there's a mix of men and women that are being shown as being in STEM. We can select classroom media representing gender balanced role models. So if we're showing that women in STEM careers exist, that will help girls see themselves as a STEM career being something that they can aspire to. Self-assess your environment and your behaviour. And I know that this is a big one for me. Like when I first started teaching, somebody pulled me aside and said, hey, do you realise that you're talking to the boys more than you're talking to the girls in your science classroom? And I hadn't realised that. And I had to step back and look at myself when I was teaching and realise that I was doing that. And if you see misconceptions happen in your classroom where somebody says, hey, girls can't do that, that's science, that you make sure that you use that as a teaching opportunity to help your classroom see that, wait, no, that's a misconception. Boys and girls can both do STEM just as well. It's just a matter of learning together. So that's the first one, gender neutral learning environment. Second one, connecting learners to careers and role models. And so this touches very closely to the first one. So showing what STEM professionals actually do in learning activities can help both boys and girls understand what the STEM industries are. I know that when I was at school, I had no idea what an engineer did. And if my teachers had shown me this is what engineering looks like, I would have been more excited about taking on engineering as a career. First Nations role models can increase First Nations girls' motivation and interest as well. That it's really important that girls see themselves represented, and often those First Nations role models get missed out as role models for our girls. And lastly, school-college partnerships can encourage girls to consider STEM careers. So if you've got girls in your school who've gone on to college to study STEM, you can consider bringing those in as guest speakers or at an assembly, or connecting over an online chat with your classroom to show girls in your classroom that, hey, girls from my school have gone on to choose STEM careers, and model that. So how can we do this in our classroom? By building real value in STEM, by seeing real world applications. So when we're doing a technology activity, showing where that's being used in real life will increase the value of that, and girls really appreciate seeing real world applications to the things they're studying. Selecting classroom media that represents a diverse STEM roles and role models, which we've talked about, and building the learning of STEM professionals and jobs into your curriculum. So not just studying science, but also what scientists do, not just studying maths, but talking about it in the context of what mathematicians do and what that means. And number 7, encouraging a growth mindset. Now, before I go on to the principle, which is encouraging a growth mindset, I want to talk a little bit about a growth mindset itself. Believing that success is fixed due to fixed reasons, such as natural ability, is described as having a fixed mindset, whereas believing that success is due to reasons you can change, like effort and persistent, is called having a growth mindset. So I want you to have a moment to think about this. I know it's really hard to say to yourself, oh, I can't do this because I'm not talented in that area. That's called having a fixed mindset. But if you say, I can't do this yet, and I can learn how to do this, I can practice doing this, that's having a growth mindset. So have a moment to think about how your students see themselves as STEM learners, and how you can create a growth mindset in your classroom. So encouraging a growth mindset can increase the sense of belonging and break down stereotypes. Oops, sorry, I've missed my own slide here. Okay, so students need to see themselves as belonging in STEM, and if they think they can never get there, they'll never see themselves as being belong. So encouraging them to realise that it's a process of growth, not something that's blocked from them. Students as young as 6 hold stereotypes that boys are better than girls in STEM, and again, this is looking at breaking that down. Engage girls in hands-on problem-based collaborative challenges, and calling the students researchers or scientists or coders can help students, especially girls, see themselves as scientists. And regular opportunities to give and seek feedback from peers and teachers can be big motivators for STEM learning for both boys and girls. Thanks, Leanne. So what are some classroom things we can do? Next slide. Okay, so do what you can to help students see themselves as STEM people. Present girls with relatable STEM role models. Again, this is back to that presenting role models thing again. It's showing role models that girls can relate to. That's really strong. That's something that they can see, that I can get to that place. I can grow into that. That person didn't start off doing STEM, but they're doing it now. Provide opportunities for self-reflection in STEM learning. Again, seeing yourself as being able to step, to learn, to get to somewhere, that means that I have to work out where I am now and how I'm going to get there, and that needs self-reflection time. And lastly, support students in receiving and using feedback to learn, learning that it's okay to make mistakes. That's part of how we learn. It doesn't mean you're bad at something, it just is part of the learning process. So there's some overarching classroom strategies that help students see themselves as STEM people. So now it's time to reflect and discuss. This is enough of me talking. So step 1, we've talked about those principles. They're on your mind map on page, what page is it on? It's on page 8. On your mind map, so there's the first 3 principles we've looked at are jotted down there, and we've talked about some of the things that we can do in a classroom. Reflect on those and then have just a little bit of a brainstorm by yourself. What are some small practical strategies you could do in your classroom around each of those? And this is just throwing ideas down. There's no right or wrong answers. This isn't deciding what you're going to do for the rest of the project. This is just throwing down some ideas that appeal to you based on what we've talked about. Step 2 is to gather either with your team or by yourself and to really hone in on one of those ideas that you think could do with some more discussional exploration. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, we'll share back with the whole team in chat. The whole 46 of us who've dialed in today will share back in chat. And I'll give you some timers so you know when to start and when time is getting short. So are there any questions in chat about that activity before I send you off to reflect? Okay then. I'm going to give you 4 minutes then to jot some ideas down on page 8 in your workbook, and your time starts now. That would be fantastic. So that's it for time up, and yeah, as Nicole mentioned, Grace and Josephine have already put some great ideas in chat. Can either of those, do you have the ability to share a bit more with us over voice what you've been working on, or the ideas you have?
Good afternoon. My point is coming from a school in East Peak, we don't have this the STEM facilities, or should I say the research centers in our province. So it would be nice if we can organize for Zoom meetings or such with this NARI, maybe University of Technology, the STEM professionals, so they can give a talk to our students to inspire them as well as us, the teachers. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's a great idea. Yeah, and I feel like lots of Zoom and online meetings have opened up so many opportunities for our students to be able to see people and have them talk without having to travel. It's amazing. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. So with the keyboard captains and people in their groups, please share back into chat any of the ideas you had for each of the principles that you'd like to share with the larger group that you think might be interesting for your team to explore. And there's 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll start on the next block of principles. I might give us 2 minutes to share back in chat, and then we'll start. If there's anybody else who would like to share out loud, please let us know.
Junior, did you want to tell us about your idea? I thought that was really good for, you know, time poor STEM people.
Yes. Just a little bit about the studies. You know, people like Dr. Koya, she's a chemist, but, you know, that's chemistry, a big field. And in the context, what are you doing in a profession or skills, expertise that is addressing some practical issues in PNG that students from PNG can be able to learn from. And she can also share some, you know, wider field across what she's doing. So she can be able to, you know, think practically about what field they can be able to tap into and along their education journey. So at least give them, you know, in the world in terms of studies, and they can set their goals to possibly get to there as well.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, feel free to keep sharing ideas in chat because I'm very keen for this session to be about learning from each other. So feel free to keep dropping your ideas in chat, but we are going to move on to steps our next second block of principles, which is looking at principles 2, 3, 5, and 6. And I should mention that as all of your ideas are going into chat at the end of the session, they will be gathered up and shared out with the wider group as well. So don't feel like you need to keep up with chat as well as keep up with us, but we are very keen for everybody to share. So thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to look at our next block of principles now. So 2, 3, 5, and 7. And so the process will be similar. We'll look at 4 principles in order, and then again, we'll have time for you to reflect, to share with your teams, and then share back with the, to gather your ideas with your teams and then share back with the wider group. So I'm going to go through the next 4 principles. So the first one is to ensure everybody gets hands-on, and that seems obvious, but girls identified the hands-on aspects of activities and experiments in school as one of the main reasons they enjoy things like science and technology and building. Like if they get their hands in and do things. But the counter to that is that girls and boys have been found to engage differently in hands-on group work, and that they use different language and they engage with materials differently, and they might be put off by the fact that they're doing things differently, but that's fine. And so helping them see that doing things differently is still good. And girls in primary school, like as still quite early, report again that anxiety about engaging in hands-on because they see themselves as being, often see themselves, not always, but often see themselves as being bad at the spatial part or bad at the maths part. But we need to show them they can be just as good as the boys. They just need the time and the practice and the opportunity to engage in those hands-on activities. And girls sometimes step back and let boys take over. So us giving girls a chance to engage is something that, again, this is going back to my teaching, I didn't realise was happening in my classroom until I was exposed to the fact that it happens. So some classroom overarching classroom strategies that can help with that. Next slide, please, Leanne. So first thing we can do is encourage equal participation and sharing, and there's lots of ways of strategies we have as teachers to do that. Number 2 is to help all students develop their spatial awareness, thinking and confidence. So it might just be a confidence issue that they need to get over to help them get engaged in these hands-on activities. And another thing is to use a diverse range of STEM equipment and technology. And so there might be some things that we do by doing experiment, there might be some things that we do by going outside, there might be some things we do by doing research on the internet, but to give them a whole range of different equipment and opportunities to engage. And girls find that super engaging. I mean, boys do too, but researchers found that it helps girls so much in getting involved into STEM and getting the confidence to be involved in STEM. So that's principle 2, hands-on for everybody. Principle 3 is to design your learning experiences to embrace context and problem solving. So that's quite complicated. But what it means is to think about meeting students where they're at and helping them learn how to solve problems. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So your curriculum should meaningfully combine STEM disciplines, and that can improve learning outcomes for boys and girls. And this goes back to what Leanne was talking about earlier about what STEM means. And sometimes it's about doing science in science class and technology in technology class and maths in maths class. But also it's about bringing them together sometimes and using maths where it's relevant in your science class and using technology where it's relevant in your coding class. So it's combining them meaningfully, and that can improve learning outcomes for both boys and girls. The engineering design process, and that's in capitals for a reason, and I don't know if you've come across that before, but it's worth writing down and Googling later if you haven't. But this is a really useful design process that helps students enjoy, be creative, and personalize their projects in STEM. So it's a way of structuring that problem solving process for students, and it's really useful and helpful if you haven't come across it before. And teaching approaches that respond to students' culture can increase problem solving and interest in study and careers. And so there's lots of different cultures in our classrooms, and sometimes our STEM curriculum doesn't take those cultures into account. And really meeting students where they're at in terms of their culture can make a big difference to how engaged they are in STEM. So that's the principle. And so some classroom activities strategies that can help you embrace context and problem solving. So engaging students and in identifying meaningful and personal problems. And so this is something we'll touch on in some of the other principles. But if students are allowed to choose problems and projects that have meaning to them, they're much more likely to engage in them. And there's a little picture there of bushfires, which has been a big issue in where I live at the moment. And designing science projects around planning for a bushfire or what that means and what scientists do in that context will engage kids a lot more than just doing chemistry for chemistry's sake. 2, adopting teaching approaches that engage and support students in STEM. So by that we mean they're making sure that there's an inquiry approach, there's a problem solving approach, again going back to that design process, the engineering design process that we talked about, will actually support students because they can see what the steps are that they're engaging in when they're solving their problems. And integrate STEM authentically, which again means that where there's opportunities to talk about where STEM fits into students' lives and it's authentic and real, that will make a difference to how students learn. So that's embracing context and embracing problem solving. So we've skipped on to 5 now, because we've already done 4. Engineer collaborative learning. So that's not engineer as the engineer in STEM, but this is like making sure in your classroom that you are creating opportunities for students to learn together and from each other. Part of that is that boys and girls have different activity preferences. The boys love activities where it's competitive, but girls much prefer activities that are collaborative, so that we build something together and there's no winner and no loser. And they also use different languages and more likely to talk about their team and us than boys are. So keeping that in mind when you're designing your activities. Girls and boys also engage differently in group work. And again, this leads back to our hands-on activity thing, that boys are more often likely to take the lead or take the lead roles in some of these activities. And girls are more likely to step back. And so keeping your eye on that in your classroom is something to be wary of. The layout of your actual physical space in your classroom can influence the productivity of group work. So sometimes it might be you might need to move desks or go outside if you want your students to work together in ways that make sense. And collaborative opportunities can be improved for everybody by providing multiple ways for students to engage. And again, that goes back to making sure there are lots of different ways that students are learning, whether it's hands-on, whether it's practice, whether it's problem solving, making sure they've got lots of different ways they're learning. So that's the principle. And then some classroom strategies that we could build into our program. Next slide, Leanne. Sorry. Yep. So number one, include some actual STEM projects where students work together towards a shared goal. So there'll be some projects that students will do by themselves and some projects that they do together with a group. And as part of that, we need to structure the topic, the project, so that everybody gets a go in that project and that what they're doing together is clear. Create and use spaces that support students working together collaboratively. It might mean going to the library, it might mean going to an auditorium, it might be going outside, it might be just moving the desks in your classroom. And 3, encouraging equal and active participation of all students. So often, as I said, there'll be a person in a group who doesn't really do much when we do group work. So how can we make sure that everybody in the group has something that they need to be doing all the time so that everybody's engaged in what's going on? So they're just some overarching ideas for 5. And then 6, provide choice and creative opportunities to demonstrate understanding. So that's teaching approaches that engage students in making the world a better place, can positively influence students' attitudes. So Leanne mentioned before that girls in particular want to make a difference in their world. So making sure that that's something that you're bringing into your activities. Participating in a community inspires students to create innovative projects aligned to their interests. So doing things for your community. What if water is an issue in your community, getting clean water? Then maybe students could be involved in a project that helps to what can we do about this problem? And there's lots of STEM things, engineering things, science things that you could bring into that kind of project. And students express dissatisfaction when they have no control over the purpose of their projects. And I remember this as well as a teacher. You say, okay, here are the 7 project ideas. Group 1, you're doing idea 1. Group 2, you're doing idea 2. Group 3, you're doing idea 3. Students get angry when that happens. They want to choose themselves what their projects are, and they want to choose themselves how they enact that project. And that can't always be the case, but giving them those opportunities makes a difference. So some classroom strategies: have students create projects that align with their own personal interests or with their culture or with their social values. We can provide authentic choice for students in their projects, and we can harness some existing STEM project problem solving processes. And here we have the engineering design process, a little tiny picture of it. But again, this is just a really great process. It's a bit like your action research process in that it steps out for your students, exactly the steps involved in solving a problem. And it really helps structure those activities for students. So that's principle 2, 3, 5, and 6. That's a lot. So we've got 4 blocks on your workbook on page 9. And again, I'm going to give you some time to reflect. Do we have enough time to do an expanded? No, we probably don't. I might give you the same time as last time because we don't want to run short on time. So we'll give you 4 minutes, 10 minutes, and 4 minutes again. Was that enough time last time? Do people think that was enough time last time? Because we'll give you the same time.
Yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, same as last time. So we'll give you 4 minutes, and I will give you a warning when that's about to end to reflect on what small strategies you are interested in from all of that. And then we'll gather and then we'll share. So your time starts for reflection now. Okay, so that's 4 minutes up. So now 10 minutes to gather together, either to share your ideas and refine some. Time's almost up, so if you wanted to start putting ideas into chat, please do. There's the think tank of amazing brains in this group is amazing. I'm just blown away. So many amazing, practical, small strategies being shared at the moment. It's incredible. So yeah, just blown away.
And it's great to see how people are thinking about what can work in their own setting because they know what environment they're in and what's going to work.
Okay, I might call it there then. Keep putting your ideas in as we talk, but that's wrapping up our principles deep dive, looking at those in more details and thinking about how you can apply them in small ways, small, approachable, practical ways in your own context. So that's it from Leanne and I. We're excited to see what you all do, and hopefully this opportunity to cross-fertilise ideas both within your teams and between teams has been useful, and will give you some starting points for thinking about what you might do in the design phase of that. And I think that's thank you for me, and I'll let Leanne say thank you too, and I think then we'll hand it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Michelle. And thank you all for your participation. It's been fantastic. I've loved seeing everybody's ideas. The Girls in STEM Toolkit, just briefly, if I can, is free. So if you have got access to the internet, we've got lesson ideas, other materials that you can use however they suit. Over the next 2 years, we're going to be adding more things and doing more activities. One of the activities we're going to do is have a free student conference. So we're in the planning phases for that, but if you want to keep across what we're doing, sign up for our newsletter or join us on one of the social media platforms, and then you can hear about any other activities that we're going to have going on in the next couple of years. So again, thank you for your generosity of spirit and sharing, and thank you for involving us in tonight. Over to Tom to give you your homework.
Well, before we talk about homework, can we all just join together and say a big thank you to Leanne and Michelle for sharing their expertise and guiding us through their presentation. So on behalf of everybody, a big thank you to you both for joining us. And I can see a few hands clapping as all of our audio. Really grateful that you joined us, and that's going to give us a really great starting point. What a rich set of ideas that are being gathered. Just to remind everyone, we're going to gather all of the notes, all of the ideas from the chat. We're going to kind of pull that all together, and we'll get that back to you in some way as well, so that you can kind of go through them in your own time and everything. But we're really grateful, Leanne and Michelle, that you're able to join us, because what's going to happen next is that we're going to start as a team, all of us are going to start to grapple with what's the focus for each of us going forwards. What is our action research going to focus on? And the ideas and principles that you've shared today are really going to help us to narrow that down. I'm just going to share my screen as we start to wrap up our session. Well, that's nice. Just actually, let's look at there's all your faces. So often when we're kind of sharing a screen, we can't see everyone. So it's great. It might be a good time to do a screenshot actually or something, Nicole or Sophie. I'm just going to switch that off as well. There you all are. Great. Great to see you all. I'm going to share in a minute the next steps, but I'm going to do a quick screen grab. So smiley faces. There we go. Great to see you. At the end of the day, that's what you want, isn't it? Right. Lovely to see you. Now, what we're going to do now is I'm just going to tell you about what is next, what you're doing after this. If you've got your workbook with you, right at the end, towards the end of it, it says before the next workshop. So we're kind of in that part of the workbook, all right? And I'm just going to share my screen now, and I'm going to tell you what we do next. So here we go. Let's have a quick look here to load up. I don't know if you noticed, we've also got, I did a quick example of the mind map tool. If you've not tried this with your students, this is a lovely way to allow them to present their thinking and their understanding. We've used it before in some project-based learning projects that some of you have been involved in. But the idea of using a mind map is a lovely way to organize their thinking. And so don't forget, you can try any of these little ideas in your classroom with your students too. And I really encourage you to do that. So if you haven't, if you might want to finish off some of your notes, that's something that you can do this week. And there's a really specific task. Let's just quickly look at that. Step number 1, reread the list of principles again. So go back over them. I've included them here. We're going to post up the links to the slides and everything. And I've done my best to put them in the chat in WhatsApp too. So you've got all of that. So reread, review your notes. This is what you're doing before next Thursday. You're going to reflect on the principle which is most relevant to you. And this is you starting to identify, of all 7, which one are you starting to kind of gravitate towards? Which one are you thinking, yes, this is the most important for my classroom, for my teaching, for my setting? And so you're going to start to make that decision across this next week. And I've put some questions here. Which principle have you chosen? Describe why this is an issue in your classroom. I saw a few of those things in the notes. Some of you are saying that your classroom resources are difficult to get hold of, and hands-on things means there's a limit. So describe that issue. Just tell us the story of this principle in your place. And then I want you to start to think about what information tells you that this is the right thing to focus on. And this is us starting to improve our ability to say, this data tells me that this is the right thing I've got to work on. So you might do some observation in your classroom. In fact, let's have a look at an example of how you might fill this in. So here's one that you can see on the screen. It says, I want to improve how gender neutral my classroom is. I'm going to focus on the resources we have available. What's the story of that? Well, this is an issue because we have some older materials we use to support the teaching of science. These resources do not model girls or women being successful. So you see that. That's the example. That's the story you're starting to tell. But what's the data? Well, you might review the different resources that you have. You might look at some examples of gender bias from the textbooks that we use. You pull them out and you say, this is what's telling me that we've got to get better at this. Try to find that data. Or maybe you're thinking that we've never reviewed our resources like this before, and that's the information that guides you. So this is all in your workbook as an example, so don't forget that. That's the kind of towards the end of the booklet, page number 12. And so this is what we're going to be doing before the next workshop. And the next workshop, next Thursday, is all about designing our action plan. So you're going to be making some decisions, and you're going to do some of this work in our session next week as we start to wrap up. All right, so you've got that in your workbook ready for next week. You know that you're going to get some reminders and some great resources during the week as I kind of take our workshop and break it down into little pieces that you can digest on your mobile phone. I'll be doing that tomorrow and on Monday as well. Can I just extend a big thank you to all of our, especially our guests for joining us, but also to extend that out to our team behind the scenes have been helping and supporting. So we've got lots of different people making these sessions happen. I just want to extend my gratitude to everybody involved for bringing this professional learning together. So without further, I'll leave you to it. Have a great evening. Have a great afternoon. Thanks again, and we'll see you in our next workshop next Thursday.